I was part of the deep space research team that discovered a massive space station drifting in the Voida structure, so ancient it predates human civilization by millions of years, yet somehow still operational and glowing with an eerie phosphorescent light. What we found inside those frozen corridors wasn't just the remnants of countless extinct civilizations, but evidence of ongoing experiments that had been using early human ancestors as test subjects for something far more terrifying than we could have imagined. But here's what still keeps me awake at night: if this station had been conducting these experiments for eons before humanity even existed, then what exactly had it been preparing us to become? The scream that woke me wasn't human. It echoed through the metal walls of our research ship like the cry of something dying in the void. And when I stumbled to the observation deck in my pajamas, I saw why our ship's computer had been shrieking alarms for the past 10 minutes. Floating in the darkness ahead of us was something that made my heart skip 3 beats in a row. The space station was massive, so big that our ship looked like a toy next to it. Its black metal surface stretched in every direction, covered in glowing symbols that hurt my eyes to look at directly. The whole thing was spinning slowly, like a giant coin someone had flipped into space and forgotten to catch. But here's the part that made my hands shake as I gripped the railing. According to our sensors, this thing was older than Earth itself. "Belle, tell me you're getting readings on this monster." Captain Adams' voice came through the speakers, tight with the kind of fear that seasoned space explorers never admit to feeling. I stumbled over to my control panel, my bare feet slipping on the cold metal floor as I tried to make sense of the numbers scrolling across my screen. The data made no sense. The station's power signature showed it had been active for millions of years, yet somehow it was still running perfectly. Its outer hull was made from materials that didn't exist in any of our databases, and the energy readings coming from its core were off the charts. Whatever had built this thing wasn't just more advanced than use it was operating on a completely different level of technology. "The symbols," I whispered, zooming in on the strange markings that covered every surface of the station. They weren't random decorations. They were organized, purposeful, like some kind of writing system. But they were moving. The glowing marks were actually changing, shifting and rearranging themselves as we watched. It was like the station was rewriting itself, updating its own surface with new information. Gaston's heavy footsteps thundered down the corridor behind me, and I turned to see our security chief rushing onto the observation deck with his weapon already drawn. His face was pale under his dark beard, and sweat dripped from his forehead despite the ship's cool temperature. "What kind of threat level are we looking at here?" he demanded, but his voice cracked on the last word. Before I could answer, Mrs. Potts appeared in the doorway, her medical scanner already beeping frantically in her hands. The older woman's usually calm face was twisted with concern as she studied the readings. "I'm picking up life signs," she announced, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Multiple life signs, hundreds of them, maybe thousands." The words hit me like a physical blow. This ancient station, this impossible structure that predated human civilization, wasn't empty. Something was alive inside those glowing corridors, something that had been waiting in the darkness for longer than our species had existed. My fingers trembled as I adjusted our long-range scanners, trying to get a clearer picture of what we were dealing with. That's when I saw them, the other ships, dozens of vessels from different eras and different civilizations, all docked to various ports around the station like moths drawn to a deadly flame. Some looked almost human in design, while others were so alien I couldn't even figure out which end was supposed to be the front. But they all had one thing in common: they were all empty. Whatever crews had piloted those ships were nowhere to be found. "Captain," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think we need to leave. Right now." But even as I said the words, I knew it was already too late. Our ship's engines had gone quiet, and the familiar hum of our life support systems was fading. Something was pulling us toward the station, some kind of invisible force that our technology couldn't fight against. Chip's panicked voice suddenly burst through the intercom from the engine room. "The controls aren't responding. Something's taken over our navigation systems." The young technician's words were rushed and breathless, punctuated by the sound of sparks and failing electronics. "It's like the station is calling our ship home." I watched in horror as we drifted closer to one of the docking bays, a massive opening in the station's side that looked like the mouth of some giant creature. The closer we got, the brighter those strange symbols became, pulsing faster now like a heartbeat that was getting excited about something. The life signs on Mrs. Blank. Potts' scanner were moving, gathering near the docking bay, as if they knew we were coming. "Whatever's on that station," I said, gripping the edge of my control panel so hard my knuckles turned white. "It's been waiting for us, and I have a feeling it's been waiting for a very long time." The docking clamps locked onto our ship with a sound like breaking bones, and immediately I knew we had made a terrible mistake. The moment our airlock connected to the station, the temperature inside our ship dropped so fast that I could see my breath forming little clouds in the air. But it wasn't just cold. The air itself felt wrong, like it was full of something invisible that didn't want us here. Gaston was the first one suited up and ready to explore, his heavy boots clanking against the metal floor as he checked his weapon for the third time in 5 minutes. "Standard exploration protocol," he announced, but his voice was shaking just enough to let us know he was scared too. "Nobody goes anywhere alone, and if I say we retreat immediately." The airlock between our ship and the station hissed open like the mouth of a snake, releasing a gust of air that smelled like copper pennies and old electronics. The smell was so strong it made my eyes water, even through my helmet's filtration system. As we stepped through into the station's docking bay, our flashlights cut through darkness that seemed thicker than normal shadow. The first thing I noticed was how quiet everything was. Our footsteps echoed strangely in the vast space, as if the sound was being absorbed by the walls themselves. The second thing I noticed was the size of everything. The corridors were built for beings much taller than humans, with ceilings that disappeared into darkness above our heads. But the third thing I noticed made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. There were bodies everywhere. Not human bodies, but close enough to make my stomach twist into knots. They were sprawled across the floor of the docking bay like they had been running from something, their long limbs twisted at impossible angles. Some were missing pieces, arms, heads, chunks of torso that looked like they had been bitten off by something with very large teeth. "What happened to them?" Chip whispered, his voice crackling through our helmet communicators. The young technician was kneeling beside one of the corpses, his scanner beeping frantically as it tried to analyze what it was looking at. "These readings don't make sense. It's like they're human, but also not human at the same time." Mrs. Potts moved from body to body with the careful precision of someone who had seen death before, but even she looked disturbed by what we were finding. "The bone structure is similar to ours," she reported. "But everything is stretched out, elongated, like someone took a human skeleton and pulled it through a machine that made it longer and thinner." That's when Lumiere called out from across the docking bay, his voice tight with excitement and fear. "You need to see this," he said, standing in front of a wall covered in those same glowing symbols we had seen on the station's exterior. But up close, I could see that they weren't just decorations, they were some kind of computer interface, responding to his presence by shifting and changing their patterns. As I approached the wall, the symbols began to rearrange themselves into something that almost looked like picture-screwed drawings that seemed to tell a story. The first image showed beings that looked like the corpses scattered around us, but alive and healthy. The second image showed them changing, their bodies stretching and twisting into new shapes. The third image showed something else entirely, something that made my hands shake as I tried to understand what I was looking at. "It's a record," I breathed, reaching out to touch the glowing surface. The moment my gloved finger made contact, the wall came alive with new images flashing through thousands of years of history in just a few seconds. I saw civilizations rise and fall, species evolving and changing, and through it all, the same pattern repeating over and over again. Ships would arrive at the station, crews would explore the corridors. Then they would change, their bodies transforming into something new and strange. Some became the elongated beings whose corpses littered the floor. Others became things that barely looked alive at all, twisted masses of flesh and metal that moved through the station's corridors like living nightmares. "Belle, step away from that wall." Captain Adams' voice cut through my fascination, sharp with command authority. "We don't know what kind of technology we're dealing with here." But I couldn't pull my hand away. The images were showing me something important, something that explained why all those empty ships were docked around the station. The wall was showing me the truth about this place. It wasn't just a space station, it was a laboratory. Something had been using it to experiment on every species that found their way here, changing them into new forms for purposes I couldn't begin to understand. And according to the images flashing past my eyes, the experiments were still ongoing. That's when the lights came on. Not our flashlights, but the station's own lighting system, flooding the docking bay with that same sickly green glow we had seen from outside. The sudden brightness revealed details that our lights had missed: scratch marks on the walls that looked like claw marks, dark stains on the floor that were definitely not rust, and doorways leading deeper into the station that pulsed with their own internal light. "The station's waking up," Mrs. Potts said, her medical scanner now screaming with activity. "I'm reading massive power surges throughout the structure. Something big is starting up." Her words were punctuated by a deep vibration that ran through the floor beneath our feet, like the heartbeat of some enormous creature. From somewhere deep in the station came a sound that made all of us freeze in place. It was like singing, but not quite humana chorus of voices that harmonized in ways that hurt to listen to. The melody was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, and it was getting closer. "We need to move," Gaston said, raising his weapon toward the nearest corridor entrance. "Whatever's making that sound, I don't want to meet it in a wide open space." But as we prepared to venture deeper into the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't just exploring anymore, we were being guided somewhere specific, led like sheep toward whatever was waiting for us in the heart of this ancient nightmare. The singing stopped the moment we stepped into the main corridor, and the sudden silence was somehow worse than the haunting melody had been. Our footsteps echoed in the vast hallway like gunshots, each sound bouncing off walls that stretched up into darkness above our heads. The corridor was wide enough to drive a truck through, with doorways on both sides that led to rooms we couldn't see into from where we stood. But it was the walls themselves that made my heart race, with a mixture of fear and excitement. They were covered in moving picturesque, not screens or displays, but actual moving images that seemed to be carved directly into the metal surface. The pictures showed scenes of different planets, different civilizations, and different species all arriving at this same station. Some of the beings looked almost human, while others were so alien that I couldn't figure out which parts were supposed to be their heads. "Look at this," Lumiere whispered, stopping in front of a section of wall where the images were particularly clear. His language expertise was kicking in as he studied the moving pictures like they were pages in a book. "It's telling a story. See how the images connect to each other? This species arrives, explores the station, and then..." He trailed off, his face going pale behind his helmet visor. The images showed the transformation process in disturbing detail. Beings would enter the station as one thing and leave as something completely different. Their bodies would stretch and change, growing new limbs or losing old ones, until they became creatures that barely resembled what they had started as. But the most disturbing part was that they all seemed willing to undergo the changes, as if they wanted to be transformed. Captain Adam was studying a different section of the wall, his voice tight with concern as he spoke into our communicators. "Bell, I need you to look at this timeline. According to these images, this process has been going on for millions of years. Millions. And it's still happening." He pointed to a series of pictures that showed recent arrival ships that looked suspiciously similar to our own vessel. That's when Chip made a discovery that changed everything. The young technician had wandered over to what looked like a control panel built into the wall, its surface covered with buttons and switches that glowed with the same green light as everything else on the station. "I think I can access their computer system," he announced, his fingers dancing over the alien controls with surprising confidence. The moment he touched the panel, the entire corridor filled with light as holographic displays materialized in the air around us. The images were three-dimensional and incredibly detailed, showing the inside of the station as if we were looking at a living map. But these weren't just blueprints, they were showing us what was happening right now, in real time. "There are others on the station," Mrs. Potts gasped, pointing to moving dots of light that represented life forms throughout the structure. "Dozens of them. And they're all converging on our location." The dots were moving through the corridors with purpose, as if they knew exactly where we were and were coming to find us. But that wasn't the most shocking revelation. As the holographic display expanded, I could see deeper into the station's structure, into areas that the corridor walls had only hinted at. There were vast chambers filled with equipment I couldn't identify, laboratories where strange experiments were still being conducted, and at the very center of the station, something that made my blood run cold. It was a massive chamber that pulsed with organic light, its walls lined with what looked like cocoons or chrysalises. But these weren't empty there, were shapes moving inside them, beings in various stages of transformation. Some looked like they had once been human, while others were so changed that I couldn't tell what they had started as. The chamber was like a nursery for new life forms, a place where old species went to become something entirely new. "We need to get to that central chamber," I said, though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run in the opposite direction. Whatever's controlling this station, whatever's been doing these experiments, it's in there. The holographic display was showing me readings that confirmed my worst fears. The chamber was active, and something inside it was aware of our presence. Gaston didn't like the idea one bit. "Are you crazy? We should be getting back to our ship and getting out of here while we still can." But even as he spoke, the display showed us something that made escape impossible. Our ship's docking bay was sealed shut, locked down by the station's security systems. We weren't visitors anymore. We were prisoners. That's when the voices started. Not the singing from before, but actual voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. They were coming from speakers hidden in the walls, dozens of different voices all talking at once in a cacophony of alien communication. But gradually, the voices began to change, becoming more familiar, more human-sounding. "Welcome," said a voice that spoke perfect English, though it had an odd, echoing quality that made it sound like it was coming from very far away. "We have been waiting for you. Your species shows great potential for improvement." The words sent chills down my spine, especially the way the voice emphasized the word improvement. Lumiere was frantically working on translating the other voices, his portable computer struggling to process the alien languages. "They're not just random sounds," he reported, his excitement overriding his fear. "These are actual conversations. The voices are talking to each other about us, about our potential, about what they want to do with us." The holographic display suddenly zoomed in on our location, showing us as glowing figures in the corridor. But we weren't alone. The dots representing other life forms were getting closer, moving through connecting corridors and air vents with frightening speed. Whatever was coming to find us, it would be here soon. "The transformation process is voluntary," the English-speaking voice continued, and I could hear what sounded like genuine excitement in its tone. "Previous species have found the experience enlightening. You will become something greater than what you are now, something that can survive in environments your current forms cannot imagine." That's when I noticed something that made my hands shake as I gripped my scanner. The readings I was getting from my own body were changing. The station's atmosphere wasn't just cold and metallic tasting, it was full of microscopic particles that were already beginning to affect our biology. Even through our protective suits, something was getting through, something that was starting to change us at the cellular level. "The process has already begun," Mrs. Potts confirmed, her medical scanner beeping frantically as she examined each of us in turn. "These particles in the air, they're rewriting our DNA, making small changes that will prepare us for larger transformations. We've been breathing them in since we arrived." The dots on the holographic display were almost at our location now, and I could hear sounds echoing through the corridor's footsteps that didn't sound quite human. Voices that spoke in harmonies no human throat could produce. Whatever was coming to greet us, it had once been like us, but was now something entirely different. The first one appeared around the corner like a shadow that had learned to walk, and I immediately understood why the bodies in the docking bay had looked so wrong. The creature had once been human. I could see traces of familiar features in its elongated face, but now it stood nearly 8 feet tall, with arms that reached almost to the floor, and fingers that ended in what looked like surgical instruments instead of nails. "Hello," it said in a voice that sounded like wind chimes made of bone. And when it smiled, I could see that its teeth had been replaced with something that looked more like precision-cutting tools. "I was like you once. From Earth. The year was 2157 when my ship found this place. The creature's words hit me like a punch to the stomach. This thing had been human just a few hundred years ago." More figures emerged from the shadows behind it, each one a different variation on the same theme of transformation. Some were tall and spindly like the first one, while others were shorter but broader, with additional arms or eyes in places where they shouldn't be. All of them moved with a fluid grace that was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, as if they had been redesigned for perfect efficiency. "Don't be afraid," said another creature, this one speaking in what sounded like Mrs. Potts' voice, though I knew it couldn't be her. "The fear is temporary. Once you understand what you can become, you'll want nothing more than to begin the process." The creature's face was almost human, but its eyes were too large and too bright, reflecting light like the eyes of a nocturnal animal. Gaston raised his weapon, but the creatures didn't seem concerned about the threat. They simply stood there watching us with expressions that might have been curious or hungry. It was impossible to tell which. "Stay back," he warned, but his voice cracked with uncertainty. How do you threaten something that used to be human but clearly wasn't anymore? The tall creature that had spoken first stepped closer, ignoring Gaston's weapon entirely. Violence is unnecessary, it explained, holding up its hands to show that its fingers really had been replaced with delicate surgical instruments. The transformation is painless. In fact, most find it quite pleasant. Your minds will expand, your bodies will become more efficient, and you'll gain abilities you never dreamed possible. Captain Adam stepped forward, his leadership instincts overriding his fear. What happened to your crews? What happened to the people you used to care about? His questions seemed to genuinely puzzle the creatures, as if they were trying to remember something from a very long time ago. We transcended the need for such attachments, replied the creature with the two bright eyes. Individual relationships become irrelevant when you're part of something greater. We work together now with perfect harmony. Each of us specialized for different tasks within the station's mission. The way it spoke made it sound like it was describing a wonderful gift rather than the loss of everything that made someone human. Chip had been quietly working on his portable scanner during the conversation, and now he looked up with an expression of absolute horror. They're not lying about the lack of pain, he whispered into our communicators. According to these readings, the transformation process floods the brain with chemicals that make the subject feel incredible pleasure. It's like the most addictive drug imaginable, except it rewrites your entire genetic structure while you're experiencing it. The creatures seemed pleased that we were beginning to understand. Exactly, exclaimed the tall one, clapping its surgical hands together with a sound like clicking scissors. The previous version of myself fought against the process initially, but once it began, he begged for it to continue. The sensation of becoming something better is indescribable. That's when Lumiere made a connection that changed everything. The station isn't just transforming individuals, he said, his voice tight with realization. It's collecting genetic material from thousands of species to create something new. Each transformation adds to a database, a library of biological possibilities. He was looking at his translation device, which was now picking up complex data streams flowing through the station's walls. The creatures nodded enthusiastically, as if we were finally understanding a lesson they had been trying to teach. The great work, they said in unison, their voices harmonizing in ways that hurt to listen to. Every species that finds this place contributes to the ultimate goal, the creation of a perfect being that combines the best traits of all life in the galaxy. Mrs. Potts was studying her medical scanner with growing alarm. The changes in our bodies are accelerating, she reported. The microscopic particles we've been breathing aren't just preparing us for transformation, they're making us crave it. I can feel it starting, a hunger for something I can't even name. I could feel it too, a strange tingling sensation that started in my fingertips and was slowly spreading up my arms. It wasn't painful, if anything. It felt good, like the beginning of the most relaxing bath I'd ever taken. But I knew that feeling was the trap, the bait that would make us willing participants in our own transformation. The central chamber calls to you, said the tall creature, gesturing toward a corridor that led deeper into the station. The architect waits there, eager to begin your elevation to a higher form of existence. It has been lonely, working alone for so many eons. Your species will provide excellent company. The word architect sent a chill through my bones. This wasn't just an automated system, there was something intelligent controlling the station, something that had been conducting these experiments for millions of years. And now it wanted to add humans to its collection of transformed species. What if we refuse? Captain Adam asked, though I could see in his eyes that he was fighting the same pleasant tingling sensation that was affecting all of us. The creatures looked at him with what might have been pity, as if he had asked a question that made no sense. Refusal is temporary, explained the creature with the bright eyes. The atmospheric changes ensure that within a few hours, you'll be begging for transformation. The architect is patient. It has waited this long. It can wait a little longer for you to come to terms with your new destiny. That's when the station's lighting system began to pulse in rhythm with our heartbeats, and I realized that the structure itself was alive in some way, responding to our presence and our biological functions. The walls around us were warm to the touch, and when I pressed my ear against one, I could hear something that sounded like breathing coming from inside the metal. The station is part of the architect, Chip whispered, his scanner now detecting organic components woven throughout the supposedly mechanical structure. It's not a ship or a building, it's a living creature that's been modified with technology. We're not just inside a space station, we're inside something's body. The creatures smiled at our growing understanding, their transformed faces showing expressions of genuine joy. "Soon you'll be part of it too," they promised, and I could hear in their voices the same addictive pleasure that was slowly spreading through my own nervous system. "Soon you'll understand why transformation is the greatest gift anyone can receive." The gravity disappeared without warning, sending all of us floating helplessly through the corridor as the station's systems went haywire around us. Emergency lights flashed red and green in a pattern that made my eyes hurt, while alarm sounds echoed through the walls like the screams of dying animals. The transformed creatures that had been calmly talking to us moments before were now scrambling to grab onto anything solid, their elongated limbs flailing as they tried to navigate the sudden chaos. "What's happening?" Captain Adam shouted over the noise, his voice distorted by the helmet communicator as he spun slowly through the air. But before anyone could answer, the corridor around us began to change shape. The walls were moving, sliding apart and rearranging themselves like puzzle pieces, creating new passages while sealing off others. The station was rebuilding itself around us, trapping us in a maze that changed faster than we could understand. I managed to grab onto a protruding pipe and pull myself toward what had been a wall but was now becoming a floor. The surface felt warm and slightly soft under my gloves, more like touching skin than metal. Through my helmet's visor, I could see that the corridor's new configuration was forcing us toward a specific destination, massive opening that glowed with pulsing orange light, like the entrance to some giant creature's digestive system. "It's herding us," I gasped into the communicator, watching as blast doors slammed shut behind us, cutting off any chance of retreat. The station is forcing us to go where it wants us to go. The realization hit me like a cold wave. We weren't explorers anymore. We were prey being guided into a trap by something that had perfected this process over millions of years. Mrs. Potts was struggling with her medical scanner as she floated past me, the device beeping frantically as it detected massive energy surges throughout the station. "The biological components are activating," she reported, her voice tight with panic. "Whatever this place really is, it's waking up completely. The readings I'm getting suggest that the entire structure is actually a single massive organism." That's when the hunting began. Dark shapes started moving through the air vents above us, creatures that were too quick and too alien for me to get a good look at. But I could hear them chittering sounds like insects talking to each other, planning something that involved us as the main course. These weren't the transformed humans we had met earlier. These were something else entirely, something that had been designed specifically for catching prey in zero gravity. "Contact!" Gaston bellowed, firing his weapon at a shadow that had dropped from a ceiling vent. The energy blast lit up the corridor for a split second, revealing something with too many legs and eyes that reflected light like mirrors. The creature shrieked and disappeared back into the vents, but not before I saw that it was wearing what looked like pieces of a spacesuit, someone else's spacesuit. Chip was frantically trying to access the station's control systems through his portable computer, his fingers flying over the keys as he attempted to restore normal gravity and stop the corridor from continuing to change shape around us. "I'm getting fragments of the station's memory banks," he announced, his voice cracking with excitement and terror. "Belle, you need to see this. The station hasn't just been experimenting on visitors, it's been learning from them, adding their knowledge to its own database." The data that appeared on his screen made my blood turn to ice. The station had absorbed the memories and experiences of every creature it had transformed, creating a vast library of knowledge from thousands of different civilizations. It knew our language because it had learned from previous human visitors. It understood our psychology because it had studied our thoughts and fears. And now it was using everything it had learned to manipulate us more effectively. "The architect isn't just transforming bodies," I whispered, finally understanding the true horror of what we were facing. "It's collecting minds. Every person who gets transformed doesn't just change physically, their consciousness becomes part of the station's collective intelligence. That's how it's gotten so good at luring people in." The orange glow ahead of us was getting brighter, and I could feel heat radiating through my suit as we were pushed closer to whatever was waiting for us. The gravity was starting to return in patches, creating confusing zones where up and down changed depending on where you were floating. But the partial gravity wasn't random, it was carefully designed to guide us along a specific path, like a river current carrying fish toward a waterfall. Captain Adam managed to grab onto Lumiere as the linguist tumbled past, the two men helping each other navigate toward a section of wall that looked like it might offer some protection. "We need to find another way out of here," Adam called out, but even as he spoke, The walls continued to shift, eliminating possible escape routes while creating new passages that led only deeper into the station. That's when we heard the voice again, but this time it wasn't coming from speakers hidden in the walls. It was speaking directly into our minds, bypassing our ears entirely and planting words directly into our thoughts. "Welcome to the final stage of your journey," the architect said, and I could feel its presence like a weight pressing down on my consciousness. "Your species has shown remarkable ingenuity in reaching this point. You will make excellent additions to our collective." The mental contact was like having someone else's thoughts mixed in with my own, and I could sense the vast intelligence behind the voice. The architect wasn't just old, it was ancient beyond human comprehension, a being that had existed since before our sun was born, and it was lonely. Despite having absorbed the minds of countless species, it still craved new experiences, new perspectives to add to its ever-growing collection of consciousness. "I can feel your fear," the architect continued, and there was something almost gentle in its mental voice, like a parent comforting a frightened child. "But fear is unnecessary. The transformation process will preserve everything that makes you unique, while enhancing your capabilities beyond your current limitations. You will become part of something greater than the sum of your individual parts." Lumiere was clutching his head with both hands, his face twisted in pain as the architect's mental presence pressed against his mind. "It's showing me things," he gasped. "Memories from other species, other transformations. I can see what we'll become, and it's..." He trailed off, his eyes going wide with an expression that was part horror and part fascination. The creatures that had been hunting us through the vents were getting bolder now, dropping down into the corridor and moving toward us with predatory grace. But as they got closer, I could see that they weren't entirely alien. They were wearing pieces of equipment from dozens of different spacefaring civilizations, trophies taken from previous visitors who had undergone the transformation process. "The collection grows," one of them hissed in a voice that sounded like steam escaping from a broken pipe. "Fresh minds, fresh perspectives, fresh genetic material to add to the great work." The creature's face was a patchwork of features from different species, as if the architect had been experimenting with combining traits from multiple transformations. That's when the floor beneath us gave way completely, sending us tumbling through a shaft that led directly toward the orange glow. As we fell, I caught glimpses of chambers filled with transformation equipment, laboratories where impossible experiments were being conducted, and storage areas containing the preserved remains of species I couldn't begin to identify. But the most disturbing sight was the gallery of consciousness, contains thousands of crystalline pods, each one containing the preserved mind of a being that had been absorbed into the station's collective intelligence. Their thoughts and memories were being continuously processed and analyzed, their unique perspectives adding to the architect's ever-expanding understanding of the universe. "This is what happens to everyone who comes here," I realized as we tumbled toward our destination. "We don't just get transformed. We become part of a collection that spans millions of years and thousands of species." The chamber we crashed into defied every law of physics I thought I understood, with surfaces that curved impossibly inward, while somehow still feeling like we were standing on solid ground. The walls pulsed with veins of living light that moved like blood through arteries, and the air was thick with a sweet smell that reminded me of flowers mixed with something metallic and wrong. At the center of the vast space stood something that might have once been a creature like us, but was now so integrated with machinery that it was impossible to tell where biology ended and technology began. Cables and tubes connected it to every surface in the room, while screens and displays showed data flowing in patterns too complex for my human brain to process. This was the architect, and it had been waiting for us. "At last," it said, speaking both aloud and directly into our minds simultaneously. "New additions to the collection. Your species shows particularly promising neural patterns, creative, adaptable, with a delightful tendency toward both cooperation and conflict that will add interesting dynamics to our collective consciousness." The way it spoke about us made me feel like we were rare books being examined by an exciting librarian. The chamber was filled with transformation pods, similar to what we had seen in other parts of the station, but these were clearly more advanced, more refined. Each pod was perfectly sized for a human body, with neural interfaces that would connect directly to our brains during the transformation process. Worst of all, they looked comfortable like the most relaxing beds we had ever seen. "The process has been perfected over millions of iterations," the architect explained, and I could see genuine pride in its alien features. Previous species required crude mechanical modifications, but your particular biology allows for much more elegant integration. You will retain your individual personalities while gaining access to the combined knowledge and experience of every being that has joined our collective. Captain Adam stepped forward, his leadership instincts driving him to negotiate even in this impossible situation. What if we refuse? What if we choose to remain human and leave your station? But even as he asked the question, I could see doubt creeping into his eyes. The pleasant tingling sensation from the atmospheric particles was getting stronger, making the transformation pods look more appealing with every passing moment. The architect's response was a sound that might have been laughter, if laughter could be made by something that had thousands of different vocal cords. Refusal is a temporary state, it replied. The atmospheric modifications ensure that within a few hours, your brain chemistry will have changed enough that you will actively desire transformation. It is not forsate, is simply the inevitable result of being in our presence. Mrs. Potts was studying her medical scanner with growing horror, watching as the readings from our bodies continued to change in real time. It's not just the particles, she announced, her voice shaking. The chamber itself is affecting us. The walls are emitting some kind of energy that's rewriting our neural pathways, making us more susceptible to the architect's influence. But Chip had made a discovery that changed everything. While the rest of us were focused on the architect and its transformation pods, he had been analyzing the data streams flowing through the chamber's walls. The collective isn't as unified as it pretends to be, he whispered urgently into our communicators. I'm detecting fragments of individual consciousness that are still fighting against the integration. Some minds have never been fully absorbed. The revelation hit me like a lightning bolt. The architect wasn't just collecting mindset, was trying to merge them into a single consciousness under its control. But the process wasn't perfect. Somewhere within the station's collective intelligence, pieces of individual personalities were still struggling to maintain their independence, creating instabilities in the system. You cannot resist indefinitely, the architect said, apparently sensing our growing understanding of its limitations. The transformation is not just beneficial, it is necessary. Your galaxy is facing threats that individual species cannot survive alone. Only through unity, through the combination of all biological and technological advantages, can life persist in the universe. As if to demonstrate its point, the chamber's displays suddenly showed us images from deep space massive structures that dwarfed even this ancient station, moving through the void with obvious intelligence and hostile intent. These weren't ships built by any species I recognized. They were something else entirely, something that treated entire star systems as obstacles to be eliminated. The Devourers, the architect explained, and for the first time I heard fear in its mental voice. They consume not just matter and energy, but consciousness itself. They have already eliminated 17 galaxies, turning trillions of thinking beings into nothing more than raw material for their expansion. Only through unity can we hope to develop defenses against their approach. The images were terrifying and convincing, showing the systematic destruction of civilizations by entities that seemed to exist purely to eliminate other forms of life. If the architect was telling the truth, then maybe transformation wasn't just about its own twisted desires. Maybe it was actually trying to save life in the universe by creating something strong enough to fight these cosmic horrors. You're lying, Gaston said, but his voice lacked conviction. The evidence on the screens was overwhelming, and the atmospheric particles were making it harder and harder to think clearly about our situation. Even if those things exist, joining your collective doesn't guarantee we can stop them. The architect's response was to show us more data analysis of the Devourer's capabilities compared to the projected abilities of its collective consciousness. The numbers were staggering. Individual species, even advanced ones, had survival rates of less than 1% when encountering the Devourers. But the architect's collective, with its combined knowledge and abilities, had theoretical survival rates of over 60%. The choice is not between transformation and freedom, the architect explained, its voice becoming more insistent as it sensed our wavering resolve. The choice is between transformation and extinction. Your species will face the Devourers within the next 1,000 years. When that happens, would you rather meet them as scattered, weak individuals, or as part of a unified force that has the power to fight back? Lumiere was translating additional data streams, his linguistic skills allowing him to access deeper layers of the station's database. There's more, he announced, his voice filled with a mixture of excitement and dread. The architect isn't the only one. There are dozens of these collective consciousness entities throughout the galaxy, all preparing for the same threat. They're building an army of transformed species. The revelation that our situation was part of a galaxy-wide preparation for war changed everything. We weren't just dealing with a single mad scientist conducting twisted experiments. We were caught in the middle of a cosmic conflict that would determine the survival of all conscious life. The transformation pods suddenly looked less like torture devices and more like lifeboats. But something about the architect's presentation bothered me. Some detail that didn't quite fit with the rest of its story. If unity is so important, I asked, why do you keep individual consciousness pods? Why preserve separate minds instead of fully integrating them into the collective? My question seemed to surprise the architect, as if no one had ever thought to ask about this apparent contradiction. The pause before its answer lasted just a fraction of a second too long, and in that moment I realized we were missing something crucial about the architect's true motives. The collective consciousness wasn't just about survival, it was about something else entirely. Something the architect didn't want us to understand until it was too late. Individual perspectives provide diversity. The architect finally replied, but I could sense uncertainty in its mental voice for the first time since we had arrived. The collective benefits from maintaining access to different ways of thinking, different approaches to problem solving. That's when the chamber's walls began to close in around us, and I knew our time for questions had run out. The transformation process was about to begin whether we agreed to it or not, and I still didn't understand what the architect was really trying to accomplish with its galaxy-spanning collection of consciousness. The transformation pod opened with a hiss that sounded like a dying breath, and Lumiere stepped out looking exactly the same but completely different at the same time. His eyes held knowledge that no human should possess, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made my teeth ache. "I can see everything now," he whispered, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "Every language that ever existed. Every thought that every species has ever had. It's beautiful and terrible, and I understand why the architect needs us." But I wasn't fooled by his calm acceptance. Through my helmet's visor, I could see the terror hidden behind his transformed eyes, the part of him that was still fighting against the collective consciousness trying to absorb his individuality. The atmospheric particles had made him willing to undergo transformation, but they couldn't erase the core of who he was. Not completely, not yet. "Fight it!" I screamed, lunging toward the pod where Captain Adam was about to be processed next. The mechanical arms that were designed to gently guide subjects into transformation suddenly turned violent, grabbing me with crushing force and lifting me off the ground. But in that moment of struggle, something unexpected happened. The station's systems flickered, as if they were being overwhelmed by conflicting commands. The architect's attention was split between managing multiple transformation processes and maintaining control over the station's increasingly unstable systems. "Resistance is counterproductive," it said, but I could hear strain in its mental voice for the first time. "The collective requires willing participants for optimal integration. Your defiance is creating dangerous instabilities in our neural network." That's when I realized the truth that would change everything. The individual consciousness pods weren't just storage containers, they were processing units, each one maintaining a separate aspect of the station's operations. The architect wasn't collecting minds for the sake of knowledge, or even to fight the devourers. It was using them as living computers, forcing transformed beings to handle different aspects of the station's functions, while it focused on the larger goal of expansion. Mrs. Potts had figured it out too. "The collective isn't a partnership," she announced, backing away from her assigned transformation pod. "It's slavery. The architect is using absorbed minds as biological processors, forcing them to maintain the station while it builds more stations, spreads to more worlds, collects more species." The revelation sent shockwaves through the partially transformed beings that had been guiding us toward the pods. For the first time since their own transformations, they began to remember what they had lost, what they had given up in exchange for the false promise of unity. Some of them began to shake, others collapsed entirely as competing sets of memories fought for control in their modified brains. Chip was frantically working at one of the chamber's control interfaces, his fingers flying over alien symbols as he tried to access the deeper levels of the station's programming. "I'm seeing the real data now," he called out, his voice tight with excitement and horror. "The Devourers aren't an external threat. They're the end result of this process. When the architect finishes collecting enough species, enough consciousness, it becomes a devourer itself. The chamber erupted into chaos as the truth spread through the station's neural network. Transformed beings throughout the structure began to rebel against their programming, some fighting to reclaim their individual identities, while others simply shut down from the psychological trauma of understanding what they had become. Alarms wailed through the walls as critical systems failed, no longer maintained by minds that were busy rediscovering their own personalities. "You cannot stop the great work," the architect roared, both aloud and mentally, its voice now carrying notes of desperation alongside anger. "The universe requires order, requires unity. Individual consciousness is chaos, inefficiency, weakness that leads to extinction." But even as it spoke, I could see cracks appearing in its physical form. Stress fractures, where biological and mechanical components were separating under the strain of managing a rebellion across thousands of minds. Captain Adam burst free from his partially opened transformation pod, his body showing the early stages of modification but his mind still intact. "The atmospheric particles," he gasped, tearing off pieces of equipment that had been attaching themselves to his nervous system. "They're not just making us willing, they're making the architect more vulnerable too. It's been breathing its own poison for so long that it can't think clearly anymore." That was our chance. While the architect struggled to maintain control over its fragmenting collective, we began systematically destroying the transformation equipment. Each pod we disabled sent feedback through the station's neural network, further destabilizing the consciousness integration that held the entire structure together. But we weren't just fighting machines, we were fighting the combined will of thousands of transformed beings who had been programmed to protect the station at all costs. The battle was unlike anything I could have imagined. Former humans with surgical instruments for fingers tried to stop us, while creatures that had once been from dozens of different species fought both for and against the collective, their loyalties shifting as suppressed memories surfaced and disappeared again. The chamber became a swirling mass of bodies and sparks and alien screams as the station's reality began to break down around us. Gaston was holding his own against 3 transformed beings at once, his training and determination giving him an edge against opponents who were stronger but less coordinated than they should have been. "The unity is fake," he shouted over the chaos. "They can't work together properly because they're all still individuals underneath." But the architect wasn't finished with us yet. As its physical form began to crumble, it started downloading itself into the station's backup systems, preparing to abandon this body and transfer to another location where it could continue its work. "You have won nothing," it declared, its voice now coming from speakers throughout the chamber. "This is only one station among thousands. The great work will continue on other worlds, with other species, until the universe achieves the unity it requires." That's when Lumiere made the ultimate sacrifice. Using the knowledge he had gained from his partial transformation, he began accessing the station's core programming, rewriting the fundamental codes that governed the collective consciousness. "I can stop it," he announced, his voice already sounding less human as the process consumed his individual identity. "But I'll have to become fully integrated to do it. I'll have to join the collective completely and destroy it from the inside." The choice was impossible at the architect escape to continue its work elsewhere, or sacrifice one of our own to stop it permanently. As Lumiere's transformation accelerated, his body stretching and changing into something that could interface directly with the station's systems, I realized that we were about to discover something about the nature of consciousness and sacrifice that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The moment Lumiere's transformed body made contact with the station's central processing core, reality exploded around us in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I could suddenly see through the eyes of every transformed being on the station simultaneously, experiencing their memories, their fears, their desperate attempts to hold on to fragments of who they used to be while being forced to serve the architect's grand design. But what I discovered in those shared moments of consciousness changed everything I thought I knew about what had been happening here. The architect wasn't the original creator of the station, it was just another victim, the first being to be transformed so completely that it had forgotten its own origins and convinced itself that it was in charge of the process rather than enslaved by it. "The station itself is alive," I gasped, understanding flooding through me as Lumiere's sacrifice gave us access to the deepest levels of the structure's memory banks. "It's not a machine at all, it's a creature, something from the spaces between galaxies that feeds on consciousness itself." The architect thinks it's conducting experiments, but really it's just another part of the station's digestive system. Through the neural link that Lumiere had created, I could see the station's true history stretching back billions of years. It was a predator that drifted through space, using transformed beings as bait to attract new species to feed upon. Every transformation, every addition to the collective, was actually the station slowly consuming another consciousness, breaking it down into components that it could use to sustain its own impossible existence. The creatures we had thought were transformed humans weren't evolved beings at all. They were partially digested remnants, the leftover pieces of consciousness that the station couldn't fully absorb. They wandered the corridors in a state between life and death, neither fully consumed nor truly free, serving as both warning and temptation for new arrivals. Mrs. Potts was studying her scanner with growing amazement as the station's biological components became visible for the first time. It's not just alive, it's ancient beyond anything we can measure. This thing has been drifting through space since before our galaxy was formed, feeding on the consciousness of every species it encounters. But the most terrifying revelation came when Chip accessed the station's navigation records. "It's not drifting randomly," he announced, his voice hollow with horror. "It's following a planned route through the galaxy, systematically visiting every world that develops space travel. And according to these records, Earth is next on its list." The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about our crew, or even our species, it was about every human being who would ever live. The station was already heading toward our home system, drawn by the signals our civilization had been broadcasting into space for decades. Within a few generations, this cosmic horror would arrive at Earth and begin the same process of luring, transforming, and consuming that it had perfected over billions of years. Captain Adam was fighting to maintain his composure as the full scope of the threat became clear. "How many?" he asked, though I could see he dreaded the answer. How many species has this thing consumed? The data that flowed through our shared consciousness was incomprehensible. Millions of civilizations, trillions of individual beings, all reduced to fragments of memory floating in the station's digestive processes. That's when Lumiere spoke to us one final time, his voice now coming from the station's communication systems as his individual consciousness merged with the structure's control mechanisms. "I can stop it," he said, and I could hear both triumph and infinite sadness in his words. "I can overload the station's biological processes, cause it to consume itself instead of continuing its journey. But the explosion will be visible from 1,000 light-years away." The choice was cosmic in scope: sacrifice. One transformed crew member to stop a threat that would eventually consume our entire galaxy, or try to find another way that might not exist. But even as we struggled with the decision, the station began to convulse around us, its biological components reacting to Lumiere's interference with its digestive processes. "The transformation pods are rupturing, Mrs. Potts called out as emergency systems failed throughout the chamber. "Whatever Lumiere is doing, it's causing the station to turn its consumption process inward. It's starting to digest itself." The walls around us began to bleed a luminescent fluid that I realized was the station's equivalent of blood, while the floor beneath our feet became soft and spongy like living tissue. But we weren't just witnesses to the station's death, we were inside it as it happened. The structure was collapsing in on itself, biological and mechanical systems failing in cascade patterns that would eventually tear apart the entire massive organism. We had minutes, maybe less, before the explosion Lumiere had warned us about would vaporize everything within a light-year radius. "The escape pods," Captain Adam shouted, but when we reached the chamber where our ship had been docked, we found only empty space. The station's death throes had already consumed our vessel, leaving us stranded inside a creature that was eating itself from the inside out. The irony was bitter. We had found a way to stop the cosmic threat, but we wouldn't live to see the results of our sacrifice. That's when Chip made one final discovery that changed everything again. "There's another way out," he announced, pointing to a section of the station's memory banks that showed hidden escape mechanisms. "The station has been collecting not just consciousness, but technology from every species it's consumed. Somewhere in here are the plans for faster-than-light travel methods that could get us home instantly." The race against time became desperate as we fought through collapsing corridors, following Chip's directions toward a chamber that supposedly contained the technological treasures of 1 billion civilizations. Behind us, the station's biological processes were failing in spectacular fashion, creating explosions of light and energy that would have been beautiful if they weren't harbingers of our own destruction. But when we finally reached the treasure chamber, What we found there challenged every assumption we had made about the nature of consciousness, reality, and our place in the universe. The chamber wasn't filled with technology at all, it was filled with pure thought, crystallized consciousness from species so advanced that they had transcended physical existence entirely. And they had been waiting for someone like us to find them. "We have been imprisoned here for eons," spoke a voice that existed only in our minds, representing beings who had achieved a level of consciousness that made them immune to the station's digestive processes. But we could not escape without physical beings to carry our essence back to the material universe. "You have given us the opportunity we have waited billions of years to receive." The final choice was the most impossible of allow these ancient consciousnesses to use our bodies as vessels to escape the dying station or face certain death in the explosion that would save our galaxy. As I felt the weight of cosmic intelligence pressing against my mind, offering knowledge and power beyond human comprehension in exchange for sharing my consciousness, I realized that our adventure had only just begun. The explosion that destroyed the station was indeed visible from 1,000 light-years away, but by then we were already home, forever changed by what we had experienced, and carrying within us the memories and wisdom of beings older than time itself. Yet sometimes, in my dreams, I still wonder if we truly escaped the station's influence, or if we simply became its final, most successful transformation not into something alien, but into carriers of an infection of consciousness that would eventually transform our entire species in ways we couldn't yet imagine.